she always said, you bleed blue and gold. You are over the top with your officers. You know, I go all the way to protect them. I go out there to the calls. I go to the hospitals. I'll spend extra time with them, trying to seek support for them if there's a death in a family, all that stuff. But at the end, when to me, and maybe this is the wrong point of view, it no longer mattered. The politics did not care about the officers, and I could not do any more to protect them. Something died in me.
This episode is brought to you by Trident Coffee, the veteran-owned brand where every sip inspires you to live life full steam ahead. I've been drinking their coffees for a while now, and I'm glad to partner with a company whose products I use. At Trident, they're more than just coffee. They're storytellers. Crafted by veterans, their instant cold brew is perfect for those who serve, those who have served, and anyone who values wellness. Featuring natural ingredients like organic mushrooms, adaptogens, and nootropics, it's more than just a morning pick-me-up. It's your new wellness ritual. Enjoy it at home or on the go, wherever your day takes you. Trident Coffee isn't just about great-tasting coffee. It's about empowering you to be the healthiest version of yourself, because great veterans make great citizens. Try their instant cold brew today, along with many other coffee products, and taste the freedom of wellness. Remember, when you choose Trident, you're not just choosing coffee, you're choosing a path of connection through health and wellness. Head on over to tridentcoffee.com and use the promo code TDP15 for 15% off your order. Again, that's TDP15 for 15% off your order. This episode is brought to you by Soflete, a tactical fitness company founded by special operations soldiers. Soflete is dedicated to helping you achieve a healthy lifestyle. From expertly crafted training programs to high-quality proteins, pre-workouts, and sleep and recovery supplements, they've got everything you need to power through your day. Soflete also has a full line of clothing. They have you covered from shorts to cold weather gear. Embracing the motto, Die Living, Soflete inspires us all to embrace life with vigor and resilience. So take the first step towards a healthier you. Visit soflete.com, that's SOFLETE.com, and use the promo code TDP20 to get 20% off your order. Again, that's TDP20 for 20% off your order. Hey everybody, welcome back. My guest this time spent 27 years with the California Highway Patrol. He retired in 2023 at the rank of lieutenant, when the culture and the politics within the organization basically took the wind out of his sails. He's got an interesting journey, though, into law enforcement. He doesn't come from a family of cops. He didn't grow up wanting to be a cop. He was actually on his path to be a computer consultant. But an event happened, and it completely changed the course of his life. As he approached retirement, he really didn't have a plan, and he was given the opportunity to take over the director of security position for his church. This has turned out to be a lot more work and a lot more responsibility than he's anticipated. I hope you enjoy this conversation, so let's get into it. Here's episode 154 with Kelley Moore. It's a constant work in progress. Mm-hmm. And I guess the thing for me is always striving for wanting to put the best product out there, mm-hmm. and not being content with how it was yesterday. For me, I look at it as two pieces of the same, or two sides of the same coin. One, I get the experience of just having the conversations with new people and everything that I gain just on a personal level, having those conversations. Mm-hmm. But on the flip side, there's that perfectionist or the constant critiquing, mm-hmm. The after action reports. Okay, right. That interview, you go back and you're like, okay, this could have been better. This could have been better. Inevitably, you can't control to a degree your technology. So sometimes cameras decide they're going to act wonky and the coloring gets messed up or something like that. But for the most part, if it's something that I can control, how can I improve it for the next one?
Right. Makes sense.
Let's give everybody the VIP tour. Let's talk about you from a young boy. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up?
Okay. I grew up in Covina, California. I've spent my entire life here in California. So I grew up in Covina, so not too far away from here.
I know exactly where it's at. I grew up in Baldwin Park.
Okay, very good. Yeah. So then went through the whole school system there from Badillo Elementary School, and then Royal Oak would have been my high school. But then Royal Oak and Charter Oak merged, and they had this awesome football team. So I went to Charter Oak High School, graduated, and then after that went to Cal Poly Pomona.
Did you get the option to pick either of the high schools?
No, they merged them. I would have gone to Royal Oak, but they merged them, and then it just became a huge, they both had awesome football teams at the time. So for like 4 years, our school system rode that coattail, so to speak.
Were you already playing football like as a young boy?
No, I wasn't. So I ended up cross country, and then I went into tennis, and then I went into soccer and water polo. So those were my sports, but yeah, I never went into football in high school.
For you growing up, well, let's take it backwards a little bit. What about your family? Big family, brothers, sisters?
Yeah, so I'm the oldest of three. So I have one younger brother, and then the youngest is my sister. Grew up in a church. Both of my parents were religious, Christians. So I grew up in that atmosphere. But a single family, not broken, not divorced or anything like that. Just a very nuclear family growing up.
Quite unusual, even for the last 30 or 40 years. I mean, I definitely, that percentage is definitely on the lower end than on the higher end, unfortunately.
Yes, absolutely.
Mom and Dad, what'd they do for work?
So both of my parents worked at the U.S. Postal Service, and that's where they had met. And then they just did their entire careers in the U.S. Postal Service. Yeah.
You mentioned you went on to college. What was your aspiration? So coming out of high school, what were you thinking was going to be adult life?
Okay, so coming out of high school, in high school I graduated with very high GPA and honors. The friends I hung around, that was our world. And then, so the thought was, based off of my friends, that parents paid for your college, you went off to college, and all that other stuff. Well, once I was getting ready to graduate high school, my dad's all like, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, go to college." He goes, "How are you going to afford that?"
You're going to pay.
Yeah. And my dad's all, "Well, either it's the military or it's college." I said, "Well, then I want to go to the military." He goes, "Nope, you're going to college." He goes, "After college, if you don't like your degree, then go back to the military." So that was kind of what set me up for going to college. And so I went to Cal Poly Pomona, where I graduated from.
You mentioned your grades. You mentioned honors. So I'm assuming a very high GPA.
Correct.
Any aspects for like academic scholarships back then? Well, what year did you graduate high school?
So I graduated in 86.
Okay.
Yeah. So graduated in 86. And so I wasn't too familiar with the whole scholarship program at the time. I assumed my parents would just pay for college like my friends' parents were. And so my shot was the Naval Academy. And so last minute, because I realized I wasn't going to have my college paid for, I applied for that and went through the whole 9 yards on that. And basically my SAT score was 20 points short of everything else. Got the governor's nomination, went through the whole 9 yards, got everything, but I was just a little bit short. So that was the end of possibly having a free education and joining the military at the same time.
Had there been conversations while you were growing up, while you were going through high school with your parents about college? Or did it just kind of, hey, it's your senior year, what are you going to do after high school?
Yeah, it was my senior year. What are you going to do after high school? My dad and mom never went to college. My dad did like 1.5 years at a community college out of the military. And he's like, college wasn't for him. So he never pushed college. He says, you do whatever works for you, Kelley. And that was kind of the way I was just set up for after high school.
As a young man and in your time in high school, was there a career that you were kind of interested in? When you went down the route of the Naval Academy, that didn't work. But before that, was there a career that was interesting to you?
So I was big into computers. Like my friends, we were the kind of the nerd group in high school, but I was buying a Commodore 64 and trying to get into programming and all that and, video games. So my passion was computers. And so that's kind of the route I ended up going towards after high school.
So how does law enforcement come into the picture?
Good question. So from 16 till I ended college, I worked at McDonald's, and it was just a great job. And then ended up, as a manager before I left McDonald's. But at McDonald's, I would always see cops come in for a meal and thought they were just the coolest guys in the world. And then one night, myself and my store manager were robbed, and by a couple of guys over at the San Dimas McDonald's store. And she was in the back counting money in a safe. I was up front. It was time to close. Two guys came in and put a gun to my head. One of them, another one went in the back to her. I was pretty athletic, but the only thing that stuck in my mind was, if I get in a fight with this guy, my manager's going to get shot or killed. And so it was a very weird predicament where I was like, okay, if I do nothing, I might get shot and killed. If I do something, she might get shot and killed. And so just stood there. They took the money out of the tills, robbed her back there, and then they took off. And then after they took off, of course, the police department came to take a report. Back then, there were no cameras, and there was no other evidence. So it was just kind of probably an incident report was taken. And so I was pretty upset after that and said, I will never be a victim again. And feel completely useless and powerless when I was kind of a big guy. I was lifting weights, amino acids was big back then and all that other stuff. And I was, still in sports. But the fact that I couldn't do anything just overwhelmed me with frustration, anger, and I thought this is never going to happen again.
A couple of things come to my mind is multiple years working for a fast food restaurant, especially here in Southern California, only robbed once?
Yes, only robbed once. Yeah.
Now, from that experience, and this kind of ties into the whole increase in conversations about mental health today. As a corporation, how did McDonald's handle you as an employee back then? Was it kind of like, once it was done, all right, get back to work, or did they offer you any type of counseling, towards the mental health component of having someone stick a gun in your face?
It was just get back to work. Yeah, to my knowledge back then, there was nothing in place for therapy or PTSD or anything like that. So it was just get back to work, and okay, went back to work, went back to college, just continued to go forward.
But would you say, so at that, if I'm understanding correctly, at that point in time, you were studying computers at Cal Poly?
That's correct.
Was your plan to go into the computer field afterwards?
Yes. So to become a computer consultant, make lots of money, travel around the United States, that was my plan.
But the robbery incident, would you say that was the significant turning point to where you started considering law enforcement?
Yes, absolutely. So once that happened, I was still in college. And then I just started lifting weights more and then looking at police agencies. And again, I grew up in, a nuclear family, and I was very respectful of my father. So I kind of brought up to him what I wanted to do and what I was thinking about. He said, finish college first. Finish that first. Then if you want to do police work, just like the military, then you can go into that. So that's what I did. And graduated, Cal Poly Pomona, ended up getting a job at a very prestigious consultant agency. So it was Arthur Anderson at the time. And, but because you had no experience, you're working at a much lower pay rate.
So you still went down the route of computer consulting while you were still considering and testing for law enforcement?
I wasn't testing at the time. I just graduated. I was recently married. So I'm like, I got to get a job. I need to make money.
Got it.
So just jumped right into the field. But in my commutes to and from work, I would see CHP officers writing tickets or arresting someone. I'd see, police pulling someone over, arresting them. And then I just thought, this is what I need to do. Sitting in a cubicle underneath a lamp and just writing code was just killing me.
So what year was it that you actually started applying?
So I started applying in 94.
Did you apply at a lot of agencies, or did you kind of put all your eggs in one basket?
I applied for 2 agencies. So for the Orange County Sheriff's Department and then CHP.
How did you narrow down your selection?
I asked around, talked to officers and what they thought would be the best, what they thought of their agency or what they thought would be a good step. And Orange County seemed to be, Sheriff's Department seemed to be a nice department to work for, their reputation. And then with the Highway Patrol, it's like the world was your oyster, so to speak. You could go anywhere in the state you wanted. The benefits were great. Like I said, I just got recently married, so I'm like, okay, I need to make a lot of money. And going back really fast to my consultant job, I was working 16, 18 hours a day. And when it came time for raises, there was the old saying of, oh, the stock market's not doing well, the board of directors, so there won't be a raise this year. And I was like, okay, I need to find a job where I get paid for working every minute after 8 hours or 8.5 hours. And so that's kind of the whole, it just going into law enforcement seemed to like fit everything I wanted to do, was take care of a family, have good benefits, protect people, protect myself. Because growing up, I was always that guy that would stick up to the bully, especially with my younger brother and sister. If there was a fight or whatever, I was going to jump into it. I was going to, back then after school, you got in a circle and that was about it. And then, it went the way it did. So
when you actually got into the world of computer consulting, did you find that you actually enjoy? You mentioned that you needed something that paid better, or at least compensated you better for all the time that you were investing. Mm-hmm. But did you actually enjoy doing it?
The computer consultant, I did not. It was kind of going back, like I said, I'd been in sports for all my whole life. My dad had put me into sports and then all through school, and then lifted weights and ran and all the physical fitness stuff. But then working at a consultant company, being under, a light bulb, and then it's like, okay, it's lunchtime, and it's like the same people I worked with, we just go eat lunch together, and then we go right back to work together, and then we either go out for drinks for happy hour, and then we go home, and it was like this wheel that just kept turning. And I'm just like, this is killing me to see the same people, to eat the same thing every day, to work in the same place, and to deal with the same problems. I wanted something that like every day was different. Every day would be a challenge, and that I'd have a purpose other than working for this big company that's just turning these wheels and I have no idea what I'm doing. I know I'm doing code, but where is that furthering? What's the bigger purpose behind that?
You meant we're of the same generation. So I graduated high school in 87, and it makes me remember, it might've been a Del Taco commercial. Remember they would all, as like a big group, where are you going to lunch? Same place, same thing. Yes. When you're talking about that, that's immediately what came to my mind.
Okay. Yes, exactly. And that was just, they were great people, but I was just, it just was draining me to be, like I said, to just be in hundreds of cubicles and just go eat lunch with the same people and talk about the same thing every day. And I was just like, I can't do this any longer.
This goes back to the knowledge and preparation aspect of it. Did you know anybody that operated in that computer consulting or the computer industry before you got into it that you could have picked their brain to learn more? Or did you just kind of have this idea of what the computer consulting world was going to be like?
I just had an idea. Yeah, I never had a mentor in that area.
What about from the flip side? Did you have anybody in your family growing up, close family, friends that were in law enforcement?
I did not.
So really, your only exposure prior to applying was the interactions you had while you were working at McDonald's.
That's correct. Yes.
So when it came time to select, you were down to the Orange County Sheriff's Department and CHP. Was it just CHP called first?
That's correct. Yes. So CHP called first, and I was pretty excited about that. Again, I was a little bit frustrated with my current job, so I'd applied for Toyota, and so I was kind of in the process with them going, okay, I want to go because I was into cars. I'm like, okay, I get a free car, work for this company, I'll code for them. It's more stable than a consultant job, just recently being married. But then once the Highway Patrol called me and they started the background investigation, I just got super excited.
For your family, were they supportive? Because you're also coming into it at a period
right after the Rodney King riots. So there was a lot of, kind of like today, kind of tension, unrest. From your family's perspective, were they in support of you going towards law enforcement, or was it either from your mother and father's side or from your wife's side, were they apprehensive?
My family side was very supportive. My wife's side was not. She was Chinese, first generation, and in their culture, law enforcement's not thought of so highly from where they come from. So it's very corrupt. It's more like a gang, so to speak, and how they treated the people. So to her family, it was like, no, you're not going to do this. This is bad. The analogy was made that, the only there's no difference between you and the criminals. You swim in the same pool, of water. And I'm like, okay, but I was going to do it anyways, because it was what just fed my physical, well-being and my mental well-being, and not being a victim, kind of going back and always standing up to the bullies. It just seemed to fit where I was going in life. And I wanted to continue that.
Having already gotten into the workforce, though, getting used to a paycheck, a wife, I'm assuming probably a mortgage, was there any apprehension on your side at that point to go, okay, now I've got to basically go back and start all over again?
No, there wasn't. My first job, even though it was a very prestigious organization, was like $20,500 a year. I can remember that to this day. And then the highway patrol was, I think, more money, but I never looked at the paycheck. It was never about the money.
From your family's perspective, because one of the things for those who aren't familiar with California law enforcement, the Highway Patrol is one of the very few, if the only organization, at least in California, where you go to a live-in academy for 4 months.
It's about 6.5 now, yes.
Compared to like when I went to the academy, it was 4 months, 5 months, whatever it was, 22 weeks, I think it was. You went there in the morning and you went home at night. Whereas at the CHP Academy, you were going to be up in Sacramento for the duration. How was that impact on your family?
So I didn't have any children. It was just my wife at the time. And she was kind of going back and forth with going to Taiwan, possibly becoming a singer. So we were kind of used to being apart for certain amounts of time. So that part wasn't too hard for me as far as going away. I'd be able to come back on the weekends once in a while. And so it worked out good for me on that aspect.
So when did you start the academy?
So I started it in February of 1996.
And how was that initial transition once you were in it?
That was hard. I never did the military, kind of like I was telling you I wanted to do, but I didn't. I grew up in somewhat of a bubble, a Christian home, nuclear family. And so all of a sudden I come up here, I'm getting yelled at and screamed at and, just ripped apart back then in that time. And it was a very eye-opening experience for me, getting up super early, doing push-ups, knuckle push-ups, PT sandwiches. So they, call them if you got punished or your quad mate screwed up, everyone paid the price. So that was very eye-opening for me and got me pretty upset sometimes where I'm like, what am I doing getting up this early? I had a job that was super comfortable, 8 to 5, here I go. First I'm complaining about that, little normal schedule. And then I'm like, I don't have to take this, but my wife at the time, we got to call home every once in a while and she's like, you need to finish. And basically, I'd quit my job to join the Highway Patrol. So there was no going back. I was just, I was upset going like, okay, this is ridiculous. I'm getting yelled at for nothing, punished because my roommate or my quad mate was a dingbat, but just continued through. But it was a huge eye-opening experience for me.
Coming out of the academy, I know that the two areas that most everybody just kind of, hey, if you're going to roll the dice, you're going to end up either with the Bay Area or Southern California, the LA area. You don't really get a pick of your stations, but did you have a desire to come back to Southern California, or were you thinking, you know what, let me try some of the other areas of the state?
No, it was back here in Southern California. That's where we had bought a condominium. And so I wanted to be close to home, save a lot of money and everything else. So I was able to get back here to Southern California.
When you got into the job and actually kind of settled into the routine of it, was it everything you thought it was going to be?
It was way more than I ever thought it was going to be. What I thought CHP did was just wrote tickets and, we're up on the freeway. That all changed when I went through the academy. And then once I went through my training phases, probation and everything, again, that was another eye-opening experience for me growing up the way I did. My FTOs had to take me aside a couple of times. And, back then they could be a little bit rougher than they are these days, but basically like pull your head out or you're going to get killed. Because I didn't believe anyone really lied at that point. Guys were, hey, I don't have a license on me, or here's a fictitious license and I'm taking it and I'm getting beat up by my FTOs going, that's fake. And I'm like, what do you mean? And so it was a eye-opening experience from where I came from.
Ever a point to where you go, ooh, I made the wrong decision. This is not the career for me?
No, absolutely not. It was an incredible experience. I loved every day. I couldn't wait to get to work. And I just loved the job.
When you were plotting out your career, so you're looking at 20 or 30 years ahead of you, how early did you start thinking about other assignments that you wanted to work and where you wanted to eventually end up with your career?
So I never knew where I wanted to end up with my career. 2.5 years into starting, the police force, the CHP, I was selected to be on a gang task force that was put together through Pete Wilson. LAPD was having a lot of trouble with the 18th Street gang back then, and so they needed resources. The governor committed the CHP to give resources, and then my sergeant on graveyards was selected to lead that team. And then based off of my activity and how I was doing, he asked me to join. And so that kind of changed my trajectory from working a beat, which I absolutely enjoyed, to throwing me into a world where I was interested, still police work, but I had no idea what I was really getting into. And so it was like drinking through a fire hose with classes and working with the FBI and SEB, which is the sheriff's SWAT team in LA, all the different task forces. And it was awesome. So
what station did you start out at?
So I started out at the Santa Fe Springs CHP office. Yeah, down there off the 605 and Telegraph.
And then the task force ran out of where?
It ran out of LACC, which was our dispatch center, which is now our investigative services unit off of Vermont and 101.
Strange thing for me is, does the CHP have its own detective unit?
Yeah, now they do.
Okay.
Yes. Back then they did not. They were part of task forces, but after we merged with the state police, they started taking on those detective skills.
Throughout your career, did you ever get forced assigned to a station that was geographically not convenient to you? Because and the reason why I ask that is because that's one of the things you have to think about. And I would imagine for the most part, CHP tries to work with their employees, but it comes down to the needs of the organization. And if for whatever reason you live in A, but they need somebody at station B, you could be traveling quite a bit.
Yes, you could be if that happened, but that never occurred to me. I was able to move and work in geographic locations that were conducive to my commute for the most part.
Did you end your career at the Baldwin Park Station?
No, I ended my career at the investigative services unit. So I was a lieutenant over all of our task forces, airships, background investigations, our auto theft units, our major task force. So major crimes. So that's our detective unit, is major crimes. And so I was overseeing all those, or managing all those groups.
And where was that out of?
So that was back over at our investigative services unit off of Vermont and 101.
At what point in time in your career did promoting become important to you and you actually start making efforts to promote?
So I was an officer for 13 years. And at that point, I'd figured I'd played in about every sandbox there was as an officer. I said early on, I got to do, gang task forces. And back then we didn't really have warrant teams. So we kind of formed a makeshift warrant team. So I was involved and I got to do so many things that others didn't get to do. And I got to do it for a decent amount of time. So it was like I was done with all the officer sandboxes to play in, so to speak. So I thought, what's next? And kind of seeing how supervision was going, I thought, okay, I need to become a supervisor because of maybe bad supervisors I had versus good supervisors and how officers were being treated. So I was like, okay, I need to make the next step. Because one, I was getting bored. I'd transferred over several stations and I'd worked a ton of assignments. So I'm like, it's time to do something different.
Now with the CHP, so using the sheriff's department as an example, you get promoted, even though you've been working patrol or in an investigative assignment, you get promoted to sergeant, you're back working the jail. With the CHP, when you get promoted to a sergeant, does that mandate you going to a specific or a new station? Or would you potentially get promoted and stay right in the station you're in?
If you were lucky, you could go back to your station that you were, in as an officer. You could promote back into that office. That didn't happen very often. You'd have to go to another office that had an opening as close as you could probably get to your house. But you could go to another part of the state, depending on what was opening and how aggressive you wanted to be with that promotional list. And where you fell on that list. If you were high, you could wait until something got opened up close to home. If you're very low on the list, you'd take about anything and go up north or down south, San Diego, or back up north to Sacramento or whatever you had to do to promote, and then eventually get your seniority and come back down.
Did you ever have to take a far deployment? What I mean by go to headquarters in Sacramento or anything like that?
No, I did not. I stayed in Southern California, which is for CHP Southern Division. So I've just worked all the 10 offices we have in Southern Division. And I did my whole career in Southern Division.
I remember meeting a motor officer. I was probably 6 or 8 years on. I was working a Sunday morning shift. I worked in Glendora. Okay. And he's coming out of the mountains on the bike. And we happened to just strike up a conversation. And he was a NorCal kid who got hired by CHP, brought south. And he goes, man, I'm just biting my time. I just want to go back up. He wanted to ultimately get to, was Truckee a station?
Yes, Truckee is a station.
That was his wish list. That's where he wanted to get back to. And so from the flip side, I guess if you wanted to relocate, were those opportunities there for you?
Yes, they were. Again, kind of going back to maybe his situation is those spots he's talking about, Truckee, residence posts, those were coveted positions.
Oh, absolutely. And he even said, he goes, bro, let's say there's an imaginary list. I'm 15th out of 14 on this list right now because of my low seniority and a lot of other people ahead of me that want that position.
Right. Exactly.
With you and your career, was there ever a point, did you know as soon as you made sergeant that you wanted to then promote to lieutenant?
I did not. Promoted to sergeant, loved it, absolutely loved it. I promoted into East LA. And during that time, I got big into CrossFit and then became an instructor and built a gym over there at the East LA station. And it kind of just took me in a different trajectory.
Became an instructor for CHP?
So for CrossFit. And then it was so new, I started bringing all my equipment from home to the station and go out to a track at East LA Community College and invite the officers and saying, hey, this is what you need to do to get better and stronger and faster, protect yourself. And then it grew legs at that point. And that became kind of my cup of tea, was between Baker to Vegas and now CrossFit, and everyone at the station picking up on CrossFit. Again, we built a gym at that station, and then it just took off from there, where I got into building spreadsheets that injuries were going down, health was going up, people weren't calling in sick, because I was trying to change the culture of physical fitness up at our CHP Academy. So I was, as a sergeant and being in charge of the FTO program, I'd see these officers, they come down, skin and bones, fit in their uniforms great. Then after about 6 months or a year, they just blow up. And I said, hey, you need to start running. You need to start doing push-ups. I'll never run again. That academy destroyed me. Or I'll never do push-ups again. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, we need to do this. Being in a gang task force is all the different things you did. This is unsatisfactory. So going through CrossFit, which was kind of my newfound love for fitness, I thought this is what they need at the academy. So I started this little project in East LA. It just grew, like I said, it grew in popularity. And then, so I started doing a study. And then after about a year, my commander said, hey, why don't you put in for the governor's award?
Was there ever a point? So you were getting resistance maybe at the officer level, but from the organization top end, was there immediate buy-in, and were they trying to pull you into changing the culture, or did you even have a fight at the top end?
I had a fight at the top end also. So it's
basically had a fight at every end.
Yeah. So interesting story. So once I was told to put in for this governor's safety award, I told my commander, I don't want that. And he's all, no, you're going to put in for it. And I said, okay. So I wrote up the award, submitted it. It went up to headquarters. And then next thing I know, I got nominated.
Like the commander says, put in for it. Oh, and write it yourself.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And so did that, and it was selected. And then I was nominated and received the governor's award, myself and my partner at the time. And he was another sergeant that had brought into CrossFit. So once we got nominated for the award, the governor's supposed to come down and give you the award. That didn't happen. So my commissioner was coming down to give the award. And so when he did that, he came with a deputy commissioner. And she was very interested in what I was doing and changing the culture. So she calls my commander and says, hey, I want Kelley to come up to the academy and share with the PT staff what he's doing, how he's able to change this culture, and people are loving to work out and are getting healthy, and what it's doing for, the entire station. So my partner and I fly up there, and we go to the academy. We sit down, and it's almost like a courtroom. At this time, you got the chiefs, you got the PT staff, the sergeants all on one side of the table, and my partner and I on the other side. And so, again, maybe this is just how I was raised, but I was so excited to share what we had done, what we had, what had happened or occurred through this physical fitness.
Everybody else, you're upsetting the apple cart.
Exactly. And so you all of a sudden, the attack started coming from the sergeant who was in charge of the PT staff and saying, you think that whatever, you're better than us, and our program stinks and this. And I said, I've not said any of that, right? I was invited up here to explain what we're doing down south, because this is Sacramento versus Southern California. And so we gave our presentation, and it was very adversarial with this sergeant. And of course, you have the lieutenants and the chiefs up there from headquarters, and they're just letting this guy berate us. And so kept my mouth shut, because here you are with all this brass. And I was not about to shoot off my mouth. So that ended. My partner and I go to the airport, and we're just upset as can be, and go hang out and have a pizza and a couple of beers and just vent.
It's crazy, though, that the sergeant in charge of training at the academy would still be very close-minded to new forms of PT and fitness.
Yes.
Were they exposed to CrossFit? They just didn't like the fact that you were recommending it? Or were they opposed to the CrossFit style of workouts?
From what I know, they were aware of it, but they didn't want the culture to change up there. I thought they would be excited to see what we had done, because I think CrossFit took off in 2007, 2009. I was an instructor, I was eating and drinking the Kool-Aid. I believed in it immensely. And so going up there, they've heard about it. One of their PT officers actually had a CrossFit box, so to speak, at the time. And I was wondering why he wasn't answering up or giving any kind of dialogue. But there's all the politics in law enforcement and who wants to move up and who's part of headquarters and the academy versus I'm down at an office.
Well, and I could see him too, the one who had the CrossFit box. If he got a coveted academy slot, he's not going to open up his mouth to upset the apple cart to get sent back to a station.
Correct.
You know, maybe he's just biding his time like, hey, let that sergeant retire, move on. And then either me or maybe somebody else comes in and we start putting in, you know, new policies and practices. I'm just, you know, looking from the outside, from the outside looking in.
Yes, absolutely. So it was a very interesting experience going through that. Once that was over, we flew back down south. My captain called me into his office and he's said, "How did the presentation go?" I said, it was fine, sir. And he said, and he closed the door. He said, "I want you to tell me how it went." I said, "Oh, it was awful." And so he was close friends with that deputy commissioner that asked me to go up there and do this presentation. So that just turned into this big political quagmire where that sergeant now had to email and apologize and just became very uncomfortable. And then, yeah.
When you came on, did CHP have any type of mandatory annual physical fitness?
Yes, they do have a mandatory physical fitness.
Has it always been in place, or?
It has always been in place. But again, it became a participatory type thing because if you had injuries, they didn't want people going out on workers' comp and all this. So you didn't have to do it, but there was time slotted for it once a year.
Did was it always the same standard, or did the standards change as you went through your career in the sense of the strenuousness or difficulty of it?
The standards never changed. I don't know how they it was a military/police standard for how many push-ups you would do, sit-ups, your runs, based off of your age. So that never changed. But the emphasis on physical fitness just kind of seemed to go by the wayside as time went on down the road. And that didn't set well with me.
So as you progressed on after that presentation, did it just stay basically at the station level and you kind of driving the physical fitness for that station? Or did it even deteriorate to just you and your own physical fitness?
So it did go on. So after that apology was written and sent down, he was told to work with me in implementing CrossFit up there. So I basically wrote out how I would build a gym, wall balls, GHD, sit-up machines, pull-up bars, different things that I would recommend. And then he was going to acquire those and start implementing them. And then soon after that, I didn't hear anything else about what was going on up there. The chatter died down and I was just kind of like, everything went back to status quo. So at that time, my chief from my division said, "Hey, Kelley, I want you to work with the physical fitness of the applicants that are going through backgrounds in Southern Division." He says, "We're running into a problem where backgrounds takes a long time, at least for CHP, it was about a year process. And these guys get through the process and are waiting for an academy date. And they were going from passing the basic standards to go through the background process to getting heavy set again, lazy again, as they're just waiting for a phone call. Then they get called up to the academy and they wash out because they can't do sit-ups, push-ups, and everything else. So they said, "Kelley, we want you to put together a program to prepare them for the academy." So then Southern Division asked me to do that. I built that out of the gym in East LA and built what they called an APP program, applicant preparedness program, for all the applicants that were going through the process. But I did give my chief one condition because of what I'd gone through up north. I said, "Well, you want me to put this together? Are you asking me to follow a curriculum or can I build my own curriculum?" He goes, "You can do whatever you want. I said, then I'll do it. Because I wasn't going to go back to what the academy training was just to run them through that all the time.
By the time you ended up retiring, did the culture actually start changing, especially at the academy level?
Yes. So I think it's one of those things that you made the change, but you'll never have your name heard.
Got it.
Someone else maybe took the credit or whatever. But when I would go back up to the academy for in-service training or whatever, the gym totally changed, and they had kettlebells, they had wall balls, they had your CrossFit setup as far as implements, the rowing machines. They never had those before. The aerial assault bikes, they never had that. So they had built all that, but that was not required physical fitness. It was there for staff. It was there for if you had free time, but it wasn't part of their curriculum of the push-ups, the sit-ups, and everything else that they did.
Going back to your career and opportunities that you have, you mentioned things kind of changed when CHP took over the state police.
Yes.
And I know one of the duties that CHP took over was dignitary protection for the governor, correct?
Correct.
Did CHP ever develop or did they have a SWAT team or something like that?
Yes, so they do have one SWAT team, and it's up at the state capitol. So if you wanted to do that, there was only one team, and it was going to be up there.
Ever an interest of yours to do that?
No, it was not. I wanted to stay down here in Southern Division, and for some reason it wasn't my cup of tea up there. I got to do the warrant service team. It's not the same level as a SWAT team, but I was having fun when I was down here.
What year did you promote to lieutenant?
So I promoted to lieutenant in 19.
And at that point in time, were you thinking another promotion, or did you know that this was kind of where you were going to stay until you retired?
I did not know. So here's an interesting thing is every time I promoted, it was someone pushed me to promote or said, hey, you need to promote. You're done here. What you're doing here is great. You need to go to the next level. And so I'm like, okay, I'll take the next test. And so I figured as a lieutenant, I would just stay a lieutenant, but then someone said, hey, take the next test, which was the captain's test. But during that process, there was a big investigation out of the East LA CHP station. It was the biggest investigation in CHP's history. And I was part of that. Internal investigation. And I was part of that because I was a sergeant there for 7 years. So I'd become immersed in that whole investigation, which went on for a number of years.
What prompted the investigation? What were the allegations?
The allegations were officers were putting in for overtime that they did not work.
And you just got kind of ancillary wrapped up in it just because you were at that station during that given time?
I was at that station during that given time, and I was very aggressive with whatever I did. So I was aggressive with trying to change the sergeant culture while I was there, and the officer culture and everything else. I've kind of like what we talked about earlier. I think is you're always trying to make things better. I was never happy with the status quo. So during my time at East LA, I had brought up certain things that were going on, and then so later on when the investigation happened, they called me in to go through that and see what I'd known about what was going on.
Was it one of those things where you almost kind of got vindicated? Like, hey, I had been pointing this out to you several years back, and now you're finally looking at it?
Yes, exactly. And so that put me in a very interesting spot because I had worked there for 7 years. I love the officers. But now I was being kind of brought into this as like, hey, we had heard you knew about this and asked for changes to be made, and changes weren't made, and why weren't they made? And, and then I'm again now testifying against officers. And so it just put me in a very contentious place. So career-wise, I think you could always look at two camps that grew up with those officers and people that had promoted out of that station. And so you had people that supported that group and people that didn't like that group. And there's politics. So
would you say that was were you already looking at your retirement date at that point? And did that incident just maybe drive it home like, hey, it's time for me to walk away from this career?
That helped that immensely. So after I'd promoted, that's when I promoted to lieutenant. Soon after that, the investigation began. And so I was at the Baldwin Park station at that time before I came back to investigative services unit, end my career. So I was always in court all the time. And it was draining to see those officers that I loved and raised in CrossFit and everything else going through this. And then at the same time, Gascon was coming into office, right? The political climate was changing. And so one of my big ancillary duties it's called SRT. So it's our special response team, which would be like your MFF team dealing with riots. And that was one of my loves. I thrived in that environment. I enjoyed that environment. And once Gascon came into, as the DA, and they're opening up cases, and because I was at ISU, Investigative Services Unit, we handle all the shooting cases for our division. We handle all the major use of force. And so you see things opening up and officers going through this turmoil. And then I was involved in this investigation as a witness, this internal investigation with East LA going through this turmoil. And of course, there are riots happening during this time with homeless and Trump and everything else happening. But I was realizing I couldn't protect my officers anymore. And what I mean by that is I could write a really good use of force report, but then it was going to be scrutinized immensely, whereas before it wouldn't be. And so when I realized through all these different investigations that officers were being maybe penalized for doing their job, and I couldn't back them up any longer because I'm part of management, that's what kind of headed me towards retirement. I could have done 3 more years, which there's, 30 years is what we would do as a max. I went out at 27. So I could have done 3 more years and then maybe tried to promote further, but I realized it didn't matter how far I went up in a big department like ours. There was always someone ahead of me that would either override or this is the direction we're going with this, situation. And so I realized I can't protect my officers anymore. Going back to SRT and the riots, my officers would go through fire for me. They would take whatever hill it didn't matter what the odds were. And they were pretty intense a lot of the time in LA. Would be, mutual aid for LAPD. And so to see my officers not being able to be protected when during, say, the riots, they get beat up, they go to the fire truck, they get patched up, and they said, "Sir, I want to go back in." I said, "No, you're done. You're injured." They said, I need to get back in. And so I said, "Go back in." And so to have that type of culture, and then now going to the, our political landscape changing the last several years I was there, and not being able to protect those guys, and now they're being investigated because it's on the media now, it's for what before would be commonplace is now being scrutinized. I couldn't handle it. My wife knew I was all about my officers. I'd worked the field 15 years as an officer. I never was an admin guy. As a sergeant, I was always field. Lieutenant, I was field. And then, so I've been field my whole career. And to me, that culture and with those officers and always working in the field and patching guys up and going to the hospital for them, or they get shot, or God forbid the death happens, and always being there. And then now realizing I'm powerless to a certain point, kind of going back to, McDonald's when the gun was held to my head and I thought, I can't do anything. And so that was kind of my turning point in my career, my last couple of years, where I said, okay, I think I'm done.
Coming towards the end, did you start planning for your post law enforcement life, and what was it looking like it was going to be?
I didn't plan for my post life. I didn't have anything lined up. A lot of guys were asking me to come work for them in a security company and to guard celebrities. And that just was not my cup of tea. I've always been a protector from, school through all the way through the system. I wanted to continue that. So I kind of just made this abrupt decision to retire. My wife said, you're done. She could see that something had died in me. I was always going 100 miles per hour with physical fitness, changing the culture and everything else. And I was exhausted going through the testimony and going through the witness statements and dealing with all these issues, and just seemed like I was always fighting uphill. So she's like, you're done at the end of the year. Like, this is not who you are. And I said, yeah, I'm done. So
were you there and you just wouldn't cross that bridge? Or when your wife said it, you're just kind of like, all right, where I'm getting at is there's one thing to know that you're ready to be done, but you're like, no, I'm going to keep fighting this out. But then when your wife can see it in you, that just validates it. And you're like, no, okay, if other people are seeing it, it's time for me to go.
Yes, that was the validation. I wouldn't, she knew she always said, you bleed blue and gold. You are over the top with your officers. I go all the way to protect them. I go out there to the calls. I go to the hospitals. I'll spend extra time with them, trying to seek support for them if there's a death in a family, all that stuff. But at the end, to me, and maybe this is the wrong point of view, it no longer mattered. The politics did not care about the officers, and I could not do any more to protect them. Something died in me. It was work went from a passion to a job, like showing up, kind of like previously when I was typing code, like, okay, what's my purpose anymore? So when my wife saw that, she said, you're done. I don't want you to get hurt, because I wouldn't stop going out to the riots or the protests. If there was one, I said, send me. And a lot of maybe the other managers weren't so comfortable with it, so they were happy to send me. And then she's like, no, you're done. You're going to put us at stake here pretty soon, based off of the culture, based off of the way you are with your officers and everything else. And, she just saw that love, so to speak, die down, kind of like when you break up with a girlfriend and it's done. It was over.
And that's the catch-22, is to still using the analogy of a relationship, to potentially where you're still in love with that person, but you're not in love with them. And so your head and your heart isn't in it 100%.
Correct.
And that's where you're going to start making mistakes.
Yes. And that's what my wife realized, because I was getting more upset at different things, that I would complain about certain things in a department that I normally wouldn't complain about. She's like, you're getting grumpy. Right. And that was
could just be you're getting old.
Yes, it could be I'm getting old, but I always swore I would never be that guy in the back row of the briefing room. As an officer, being in the front or the middle, or even getting near the back, on your seniority and not having to polish your stuff or whatever. It never occurred to me not to polish my stuff. But you get towards the back row and the guys are like, oh, the system's broken. The radios stink. It's always that. And then when I was a sergeant and I see that back row, I'm like, why don't you guys transfer or retire? Like, you're miserable. So I told myself I'd never be that guy. And at the end, my wife realized, you're becoming that guy, because what had been going on. So it was time for me to go. So there wasn't any major preparation other than, for my next step. My wife said, hey, we're out of the state. Let's go to Idaho. There was a big push after the jab and everything else going on, and everyone was leaving. And I said, well, let's just see what happens. And after I retire, I don't have to work. We'll maybe sell the house and go to Idaho. But a couple months prior to retirement, I was serving at church in a security role. And the pastor asked me, "Hey, what are you going to do after you retire?" I said, I'm done working for any big agency. I'm not taking orders from anyone. I'm done. I'm going to be my own boss. And then he said, "Well, we'd like you to come on and take over security for the church through my current employer, O'Neill Security Group." And I said, okay. Because I was serving there in security, again, protecting the congregation, protecting the pastor, to me, it was like a no-brainer. And so I said, okay. And that's where I just went on to right after, the highway patrol into, security protection.
Thing that's said is, regardless of your religious affiliation, whether you practice, whether you don't practice, the fact that more and more churches today need to have security teams is a sad indication of where our society's at today.
I agree. When we're serving at the church, sometimes you hear people say, "Why is security needed? Why are you guys even here?" And I wonder, are we looking at the news and the active shooter incidents and the mental health incidents that are happening, the violence that are happening at churches? And then others are just so happy that you're there. Almost no different than law enforcement back in the day when you work and they're like, "Why are you guys here? We don't need you here." And others are, "We're so glad you're here at the school," or "We're so glad you're here in this community," or at these town hall meetings. "Thank God you're here." So you always have both sides. But the fact that it's needed is, yes, the times have changed. Kind of going back to the political landscape has changed and is that's a whole another animal. Here we are with needing security at churches and at schools and everything else right now.
Because you had a new mission in front of you when you did retire, was there any regret, or did you have I made the wrong decision in retiring when you actually stepped away from it?
No. I was 100% in. I like I said, I think because I was dead with my last job, that passion was dead, that I wasn't going back. Kind of going back to the relationship maybe with like an ex, like, why rebuild something that's completely over? That's done. That's water under the bridge. I'm on to the next new thing. And a lot of guys, it's interesting you asked me that question, that had retired, said, "Hey, how are you doing? Are you okay? Do you regret it?" Because guys that had recently retired, not from my department, are like, "I'm having a hard time, man. I really miss the job. How do you do it?" I said, "Well, I'm doing the same thing I was doing before."
For those people that are asking you, how are you doing it? Looking at them, do they have their new mission, or are they just kind of sitting around?
They're kind of sitting around. A lot of them meet like once a month for breakfast with the retired guys, and they've invited me before. I went there actually to meet up with them when I was still in a department. And to me, it was a little bit depressing to see the guys just talking about the old times, and the old times are gone. The old times have passed. What are we doing now? What are we doing to get better, healthier, improve ourselves? And I didn't want to be part of that. That was never part of the landscape for me. But for some reason, they seem to get hung up in that. And I think it's somehow their identity was always police work. There was nothing outside of police work ever. I told you, I grew up in a church. So part of like a community outside of church, hopefully I always kind of ended up having that work balance and personal life balance that was in place.
Did you keep the CrossFit going? And as far as your involvement with CrossFit?
No, I did not. As they changed and became very commercialized, I kind of went away from it. I seem to enjoy very grassroots type beginnings. And when I get involved in something and I believe in her mission, I'm 100% in. My wife knows that. And so with the CHP, I was that way. I believed in the mission, never turned back, blue and gold all the way. CrossFit in its, as it began, and it was about functional fitness, and, the reward was very small back then. It was just the best of the best, just to try to be the best. Then I got very commercialized. So I kind of went away from that as they got very formally structured and we're building these big cultures, and then just went into different segments of fitness.
When it became a competition and the game started, did you ever consider competing?
I wanted to compete, but I was and this is not always a good excuse, but very busy with work and overtime. I had 4 daughters. And so I was just grinding and working, and I love my job.
Are you saying that kids take up a lot of time?
Yes. With sports and everything else. Oh my goodness. And then the costs, right? So to put them in programs for sports or for piano or for whatever, I had 4 daughters. So, I was always working overtime, but I love my job. It wasn't like I had to work overtime, and I enjoyed every bit of the overtime.
You mentioned before we started recording that you do Krav Maga. When did you start doing that?
So I did that. I started that several years ago, and then took a break, and then got back into it about a year ago.
When you first got into it, was it just out of an interest, or was it job specific?
It was out of an interest. Yeah. Kind of looking at, you get in your basic fights on duty and everything else. But as I was getting older, I wanted to be more proficient, do something that challenged me. And so I, it was between jiu-jitsu and Krav Maga, and there was a studio next to my house. I talked to some friends who were Santa Monica SWAT, and they said, "Hey, this guy's really good. He's next to your house. Give it a try." And I did, and I loved it.
Jump ship. Come over to the jiu-jitsu site.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
When I was still with my prior organization, the instruction staff was largely Krav Maga. So there's a lot of great concepts that come from it that work for law enforcement. But just as long as you're involved in something, I tell this to people all the time, that I am very fortunate in my 30 years that I really never encountered somebody who really knew how to fight, or that I didn't give that person the reason to want to fight. Because the level of training that we receive at the basic level for law enforcement, it's almost kind of one of those things where, it's the basics, and you might even just know enough to get yourself in trouble.
Correct. Absolutely. And that's been part of my transition. Is I joined, a shooting company. So as far as I go through instruction all the time, and then same thing with Krav Maga. So like going back, the academy gave you the basics, how to carry a gun, how to load a gun. But as far as the fine manipulation and, the stress and there's a whole different world to shooting. I never had the time to learn it. You just know the basics and that's it. But now that I'm out and I'm in the security world, I get to refine those skills. So like I tell my wife, and I tell my friends that are still in the highway patrol, I'm a better shooter and a fighter now than I ever was in a highway patrol. I didn't have time for it. One, because I worked a lot of overtime, and then you get into management and you're on call all the time. It's not really an option. You're just getting sleep where you can. But now it's fulfilling those things because I work with a lot of retired cops. I work with a lot of CCW holders. In my position where I'm at as a director, to me, I have to always prove my mettle. I was always that way in the highway patrol, where if I'm asking you to do something, I got to be able to do it, if not better. Otherwise, who am I as a leader? I'm sure we all had those leaders that, were 300-400 pounds. Maybe not everyone had them, and they never shot, and you never saw them at the range. And they would skip through all the classes and get signed off on stuff. And I never wanted to be that guy. I wanted my guys to see me get beat up, suffer. And so we'd be on the same mission.
You definitely lead by example in that sense of leadership, in that the adage of do as I say, not as I do, does not work, especially when you're talking about a bunch of type A's. If they see that you're in there with them, you don't have to be the best. You don't have to be the best shooter, the best, at defensive tactics. But if the fact that you're in there and you're giving your 100%, that's all they want to see.
In your 100%. And that was probably the catalyst when I was asked to promote that I did, because you work as 15 years as an officer, you work with so many sergeants, so many lieutenants and commanders, and you see how things go. And you're like, okay, but you guys don't do it. And then you get that division. Guys are like, we don't have to do what they're doing. They're not doing it, so why do we have to do it? And then so going through that. So for me, leading by example was huge. And going back to what you're saying is, I don't care if you're not king dingling, so to speak, or you're the tip of the spear. But if you have the heart and you're always going to be in a fight, that's all I need. That you show up, that you give 100%, whether you have the muscles or not, whether you have the speed or not, you're giving 100%. I can use that person any day. And I want them on my team.
And be the best. Challenge yourself and drive yourself to be the best you. You're not comparing yourself to the next person. Are you better than you were yesterday? You hit the nail on the head. The Academy gave us the absolute basics. Absolute. They've only got so much time to train you. I can play devil's advocate, and I can understand it as you experienced, as you moved up and became more of an administrator. You start seeing from the business side of things. You would love to give your team everything under the sun. At the end of the day, though, there's only an infinite amount of available monies. There's a lot of it that has to come from each person on their own outside of what the department's going to provide you. It's a nature of the beast. You can dislike it as much as you want, but that is going to continue to be the issue for the first responder community, for the veteran community, forever. They are, at the end of the day, a business. And they're going to give you the basics. They're going to give you the annual updates that they're required to do. But for the most part, it's going to be on you to improve.
Correct. Absolutely. And that you exactly, you hit the nail on the head. It's about what you do to be 1% better. You probably heard that before, that a little bit of a cliche, but what are you doing to become 1% better today than you were yesterday and tomorrow? So make yourself better. Find something to do. Find a challenge to do. And that's what I try to do every year. I put myself through a different challenge physically and mentally to see, do I still have it? Am I where I need to be? Or am I losing it? Because I never want to lose it as I get older.
I always told myself that I never wanted to be the reason why my partner didn't go home to their family. I kept myself in a physical standard that I was at least proficient enough that I hopefully wasn't going to put somebody in a position where they got to come rescue me. Obviously, it could happen. The other thing is, think about the words that come out of your mouth and the situations that you put yourself into that could put you in a negative situation where somebody's got to come and rescue you to where they don't go home to their family. That was always kind of what drove me.
And that's exactly what drove me. And I was always tell my officers this: are you an asset or a liability? Are you that towards your partner? Are you that towards your wife? Are you that towards your family? So you're either one or the other. And you can't afford to not be that asset at home. And you can't afford to be that here at work. So get your sleep, get your head, dialed in, right? Your physical fitness, your training, everything. Because like you, I did not want to be the reason my troops didn't go home because I was on social media or I had some bad habit that was just taking up all my time and I was neglecting my work or my officers or my sergeants.
Had CHP implemented body-worns by the time you retired? Body-worn cameras?
No, it's still on a probationary system up north. Yeah, it's for our department, it's this huge thing with storage. And then being so litigious, and how many cameras do you have at a scene, right? At a pursuit, at a termination of pursuit, you have 4 agencies there and 16, 18 cameras and all these different angles and people pulled out of pursuits. And then a shooting scene is, so I didn't get involved in that point. I just know they're looking at how do they store all this? what gets stored, what gets dismissed because of costs and everything else. So I know it's a work in progress up north. They have their beta offices, but it's been on beta for a while.
Storage is the huge component of it. I was involved in the implementation of body-worn cameras in my last agency, and the cameras are nothing. You can, they'll almost, the body-worn camera companies almost give you the body-worn cameras, because where they're going to make their money is storing all that data. And what people don't realize is, with the increase in the quality of video and the quality of audio, a 5-minute segment is a huge chunk of digital data to store. You're a computer guy, you understand this. And now you're storing oodles of this every single day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, the storage farms that they're going to need as we move forward as law enforcement in general is just insurmountable. I mean, it boggles my mind how much storage is going to be needed as we keep moving forward.
Absolutely. You're right. Right on the money with that.
For somebody who's maybe, you're doing security now for your church, for somebody who has a church that maybe they're thinking about proposing a security team to, or they've been involved in conversations with the pastor and the organization of that church, what advice would you give for starting a security team, and what might somebody be like some of the things that maybe people might not be thinking about?
I would tell them to think about, well, how are you going to protect your congregation from an active shooter? Right now, mental health is a huge issue. Homelessness is a huge issue. And now they're tending to go towards the churches because either they're looking for support or it's just a very safe place to spend the night, because now the streets are getting dangerous and they're getting robbed and beat up and victimized by the other homeless. So it's whether churches like it or not, they need to start thinking about having a security team there to protect their congregants, to protect the little children, to protect the moms and the dads, right? So I reach out and always ask people to come. You know, my church is very benevolent with our resources and teaching people how to build a team and, you know, the different methods we use, the different equipment we use, what's worked for us, what's not. But funny thing is, next month I'm putting on a conference and inviting all the churches in California to come see why we need to network, why we need to have a security team, and how we need to be, you know, talking with one another, just kind of like allied agencies, police forces, your police with CHP, with the sheriff's department and the PD, that we are talking, and then mutual aid and sharing information. If we just did a TRO or restraining order on someone that was just arrested on our church property, well, now they can't touch my church property, but they can go to your church. And it'd behoove me to give you a heads up if they're possibly going to go to your church and commit the same crime or a more heinous crime as they refine their skill set. And so end of next month, we're putting together a conference to bring all the churches that might not have a security team, why they should have a security team. Those that do, this is why we need to network now. Southern Cal, with San Diego all the way up north, what's going on in the churches.
Are you guys putting out any type of social media, or is there a website for this conference?
It will be we're calling around to all the local churches, and then we have a mailing list for a number of churches. But right now it's not on a website. It's an invite only. And so it's been sent out to an email list, and then we'll call other churches and just check on them. But it's not going out to the public. For me right now, it's a lot to vet out who's coming and why, because there could be some bad actors, right? So
if somebody's listening and is interested, I'll have your contact information in the show notes. They can reach out to you and see if they can get involved in it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you find that when you came into this space of religious facility security, that there wasn't that cross collaboration from church to church or security team to security team?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, I think it's just like maybe going to our police agencies. Well, CHP does it different than the sheriffs, and Orange County sheriffs does it different than, LA County sheriffs. And either one, they don't want to talk, they're in their own silos, or two, they think their methods might be better than others. Or they just don't think, hey, body-worn cameras aren't necessary, but we believe they are. And this is why. And so I think it's a necessity that the churches start talking, because we're all on the same mission in the way I look at the big scheme of things is to protect our congregates. If you're having a 501c3 or having a religious gathering that people believe is supposed to be safe, and the children are going to play and the parents are going to fellowship, that they should be able to do so without threat of violence or repercussions, or their kids are at stake because they send them away to vacation Bible school for a week, knowing that they'll be protected while they're at vacation Bible school. Because the media tends to kind of send things in a different direction, and people now, I'm not going to church. Look what's happened at that church. Look what happened at this church over here. It's dangerous to be at church. It's dangerous to be anywhere right now, so to speak, right? It's just about situational awareness.
Are you finding that, going back to your days as CHP, and those of us who have worked in a government organization understand this, you get pushback from the top when you're trying to implement new changes? You experienced it going up to Sacramento. With the church, are you seeing that they're 100% buying into what you're recommending, or are you still seeing a little bit of, man, it's church, it's fine?
No, our church is 100% behind everything. So I'm very blessed in that aspect of where I'm at right now. The fact that they hired me on and asked me to oversee their church security is a pretty big deal. And they trust me. I've served there in a servant capacity for several years, and they've seen me and watched me, and they know who I am. But yes, I do hear exactly what you're saying. And some people come to me from their churches and say, hey, how do we get our leadership to buy into this? And my thing is invite them to this conference. See the value of networking, the value of having a security team, and why we need it.
Did you or your church make the determination to the team is going to be visible and easily recognizable, or more covert and blend in?
So
and which way do you recommend?
I recommend both, right? So you look at concentric circles of security, right? So on our outermost peripheral of the church, right? So the border or the outside of our church, we have a uniform presence. So their security, they're uniformed, they're armed. People see that. It's like a police agency. When people see that, it changes everything, right? For both people that love law enforcement or love security, and also for the bad guys. So there's that. And then the interior would be our servant volunteers, our current or retired law enforcement wearing regular clothes, but armed and protecting a church congregation. So that would be like the interior, exterior being a uniform presence. We're blessed so we can do both. Not all churches can. So that's kind of where I'm going next month is here's like the ultimate, the Ferrari, and then here's how you can make it work based off of your resources, based off of what your church is allowing you to do. Anything's better than nothing, right? Just do something, have something in place is better than nothing.
Are you making everybody do CrossFit and Krav Maga?
I can't make them. I can encourage them because they're servants and volunteers, right? So it's different than if it was at, CHP or whatever. But I can only do it myself and show them the value. And we have a Krav Maga instructor that comes and works with us all the time. And so the guys and gals see the value of it. Kind of like what you said earlier is the academy gives you the basics, and it doesn't matter what agency they came from. They're like, this is great stuff. I never learned this before, because we all get into a lifestyle. We all just have a standard. We all have overtime. We all have our commitments, whatever it might be. And that investment is hard unless you're possibly like a single officer or you're very structured with your family that this is going to, I'm going to do martial arts for this amount of time. I'm going to do lifting for this amount of time.
I think the biggest thing for me once I started doing jiu-jitsu is obviously you go into it with the mindset of, I want to better prepare myself for the adversity I might face at work. But once you actually start doing it, you realize it brings just a lot of enjoyment and joy to my life. The people that I got to meet, the time that I get to spend on the mats with people. There's an aspect to it that I didn't even really think that I was ever going to get from it.
I think you're onto something with that, because maybe going back to the preparation or transitioning out of law enforcement is that fellowship. Whether they're retired law enforcement, where you go do your jiu-jitsu, or they're not, there's that fellowship of like-minded protectors, irregardless of where you come from, nationality-wise, financially, whatever, is just that like-mindedness. So it brings in a sense of fellowship where, yes, you left your department, but there's still that like-mindedness of being a protector or being better at what I do, be more confident in handling myself.
Maybe instead of the once a month breakfast meetup, do a once a month jiu-jitsu or Krav Maga meetup.
Exactly.
So you get the ancillary benefit of maintaining your physical fitness. And there is something, whether you like it or not, there's something that comes from the benefit to your mind, knowing that you're in decent shape.
100%. One, I think there is that physical versus mental connection between the two. How you feel mentally is how you look, and vice versa. They have to go hand in hand, right? You look like a soup sandwich, you probably operate as a soup sandwich. If you look dialed in, you're showing discipline, you're probably a disciplined person. And so it's a healthier outcome, right? And you're more in tune with everything.
Are any of your daughters leaning towards public service, law enforcement?
They're all going towards public service, but not law enforcement. Teachers, nurses. So they're all in that servant type atmosphere, working at a hospital. And so they're all in military. So all my daughters are in a different aspect of public service. And so, yeah, maybe that's the culture. But I told one of my daughters that was thinking about it, I don't think right now is the time to do it. Maybe look at something else. But if you really want to do it, I'll support you.
Go back to your dad, like what your dad said, of go to college.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Go do that first and then see what opens up after that.
How long's your horizon, or how long's your window for you continuing to keep working? Have you thought about it?
My wife thought about it, because she's like, okay, you're busier now than you were in a highway patrol. And you're doing more now than you ever did. Because I have less bureaucracy, I have less red tape. So between my bosses saying, hey, take it to the moon and we support you, it's been an awesome ride, and I don't want to stop. My wife knows if I stop, I'll probably just die. I have to be active. I have to be doing something physically, right? Just finished the LA Marathon. Like once a year, I try to do something to push myself. I have to do Krav Maga. I shoot all the time. Every week I'm going through shooting training, and then with my job and meetings and everything else. But she's like, okay. She looked at the numbers. She's like, at 62 is where you hit your limit with Social Security. And then after that, it dies down. So 62 is when you retire. So technically it would be 62. But I told my wife, if I'm still as active as I am now and physically in the shape I am now, I said, I don't think I can stop. There's a need out there for protection. There's a need. And for me, it's the kids, it's the adults that want to come worship freely, that want to come have that American dream that I want to protect now that I can on the private side versus the public side or government side. And so it's just, I don't think I can stop that right now with my drive.
Well, and who knows what's going to spur out of you having this conference and where that opportunities present themselves and where that takes you. And that goes back to like what we were talking about before, in that as you come to the end of these careers, veteran first responder, have that next mission lined up, or at least be thinking about it, because you need that purpose to keep going. You need that purpose to keep driving you. You didn't go looking for a security gig at a church. It was an opportunity that presented itself. And now look at what you've been able to take it to and where you may take it even further.
Yes. And I tell that to my daughters all the time, as they say, oh, how much you make or where you are in your life, Dad. And this and that. And I'm not like you. I said, it's all about networking. Tell my daughters and my wife, it's all about giving your best, people recognizing that, and getting out there in the world and challenging yourself. I've met people, we discussed, an author of a book that we met because I believe we were like-minded. I went up there and you were there, and we didn't even meet, but we're at the same venue. And so it's just that networking of like-minded people. And I go back, if we have a moment, to my studies in school. When I had the straight A's, I had pretty good professors that pushed me, and my friends pushed me. Didn't know where that was going to bring me. Then when I was at McDonald's, my manager that, moved me up was very particular about getting an A on that scoreboard. So we'd be up all night, cleaning the dust from every little corner, which I thought as a young kid was ridiculous. But that discipline just was instilled in me. And then the highway patrol, the same thing. And then the sergeant that picked me for the detail was so doggone precise in pride, the boots, and the activity you had to be humping all the time out there and working. And so each step trying to be your best in what you're passionate about opened up another door for me without me thinking, okay, where do I need to be in 10 years? I want to be a chief. I want to lead the department. Doors opened up as I just worked, as I just gave my best at each level. It opened up the next door. Hey, promote. Didn't think about it. Okay, I'll promote. Because of those relationships in it, the people that supported you into that next part of the process. And it's the same thing here with where I'm at right now. If I had not been involved in community and being a protector outside of the church, that door might not have opened up at the church. But because you're putting yourself out there and you continue to serve, not just so linear, so to speak, with a department, but grow it out to maybe it's riding ATVs, maybe it's, jiu-jitsu, maybe it's Krav Maga, CrossFit, maybe it's LA Fitness, wherever you're going to, and just being that protector, being that servant as we are, it just opened a lot of doors for me.
Well, I think what was the most important thing you said is, with every opportunity that comes, with every instance where you think to yourself, okay, I want to get to here, wherever here is. Once you get there, continue to do your best and see what opportunities come from that, as opposed to, I made it. We'll use the example. I made it out of the academy. I'm never running again. I'm never doing push-ups again. I'm just going to coast because I got past that objective. No, when you get to that objective, even if you don't have the next objective in mind, at least strive to do the best in that position and see what opportunities come.
Correct. Absolutely. And that was my upbringing, like I said, in a church, that do the best today at what you have in your hands. Don't worry about tomorrow. Things will happen tomorrow. Things will go tomorrow the way they're going to go. Right. So kind of going back to what you just said is, wherever you're at, just pour into it, be the best, and doors will open. You don't have to say, hey, come out of the academy and say, hey, I'm going to be the commissioner of the highway patrol. In 2 years, I'm going to promote to sergeant. 2 years, I'm going to be lieutenant. In 3 years, I'm going to do this. Okay. You didn't learn the base skills of how to be an officer or a detective or any of this stuff. And then you went up to the next level. But if people see that and recognize how proficient you might be and successful at what you are, and they're like, okay, this guy needs to go up to inspire that next group.
I would say if you're putting time constraints on when you want to make your promotions, you're promoting just to get the rank. Promote when the time is right, and you'll know, and your organization will know when those two when those two streets intersect. Strive for the next promotion. There's nothing wrong with that, but don't put the pressure or the enjoy what you're doing now. Be happy with the current rank you have. Let the next one come to you, as opposed to saying, nope, in 2 years, I have to be a lieutenant. Because if in 2 years, there's not the opening, in 2 years, if your organization doesn't feel you're ready, does that mean then to yourself you've failed? No. So I would say, don't rush the promotions. Be challenged by it. Try to move your way up, because you have the opportunity to make your organization better, but the promotions will come when the time is right.
I agree with you 100% on that. 100%.
I do appreciate your time. I wish you the best going forward, and hopefully that your conference goes off swimmingly well, and who knows how busy you'll come from that.
Right. Thank you very much for having me on the podcast.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.